the University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.
Welcome, colleagues, to a brown bag conversation for the Future Professors Program Phase 2. Our session today is on strengthening the scientific enterprise in South Africa to advance STEM, science, technology, engineering and mathematics. And we are delighted today to have Professor Daya Reddy, who will be in conversation with us. I'm your facilitator, Andrew Kaniki. Professor Reddy is a professor emeritus in applied mathematics, at the University of Cape Town. Until recently, he held a Sachi in computational mechanics. He completed his bachelor's and doctorate degrees in engineering at the University of Cape Town and at University of Cambridge, respectively. He's the founder of member of EMS. Those of you may not be aware, EMS is the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences, which has now become a Pan-African network with centers in 5 African countries. Daya Reddy is actively involved in bodies that work towards strengthening the scientific enterprise and at the Science and Society Policy Nexus. He served as in terms of the president of the Academy of Sciences of South Africa, as co-chair of the policy arm of the Inter-Academy Partnerships, IAP, and as an inaugural president of the International Science Council, which some of you may not be aware was a merger between the ICSU, mainly the Sciences and Engineering, and of course the International Social Sciences Council. That has become the International Science Council. He is a fellow of the International Association for the Computational Mechanics. He is a recipient of awards for the research distinction of South African Mathematical Society, the Order of Mapungubwe, also awarded by the President of South Africa for distinguished contribution to science. And of course, the George Fossen Research Award from Alexander von Humboldt Foundation. One very important part for me is that he was my Mukulu boss. He was the chairperson of the board of the NRF. In fact, I'm proud to say that when I joined the NRF, he was the chairman of the board. And I think his period for me was probably the best part of the NRF. So I would like to welcome Daya Reddy for the presentation and conversation about strengthening the scientific enterprise. So colleagues, what I would suggest is, of course, if you can mute your mics for now, and if you have questions or comments, perhaps in the interim, you can place them in the chat box there. And when we're ready, we will then enter into the conversation with Daya. Over to you, Daya.
Andrew, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Yes, indeed. I remember with some fondness my time on the NRF board, and that's, of course, where we really got to know each other quite well. Colleagues, good afternoon. It's really a great pleasure to be able to spend some time with you talking about the scientific enterprise in South Africa. As the title indicates, to advance STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Now, the title reflects a view that the scientific enterprise needs strengthening, and I think there is an acceptance of this statement. But really, what do we mean by it? What is it that needs strengthening, and why would that be the case? Now, let me say that there are a number of considerations that come into play here. There are systemic considerations, for example, in relation to science policy at the national level. There are considerations that apply to the scientific community, to the universities, research organizations, and other groupings. And there are individual considerations, in other words, those that are relevant to you, to us, as individual scientists. And that is really what I want to focus on in my presentation this afternoon. So I'm not going to talk about policy matters. I'm not going to talk about, for example, the challenges that we have around pipeline issues, the pipeline from undergrad to PhDs through to academia and research. I won't have time for that. And in any case, I really want to try to focus on a number of considerations that apply to us as individual scientists, either working individually or working in collaboration with other scientists. The reason for this is that we are all part of a community. You may think of it as a network, and the matter of strengthening has to do with strengthening that network in various ways, which I will get onto in a moment. So the question then for me is, what are the implications for us as researchers and for the scientific community of which we are all a part in relation to efforts to strengthen the scientific enterprise? What are the features of a strong scientific enterprise? How would we recognize it? And let me just say, by the way, that much of what I will be talking about will be relevant not only to the STEM disciplines, but shall we say broadly to scholarship. Okay, so let's continue then. In fact, before I get into things, I just want to share, I have only one slide, and I'm going to start actually with some remarks about the scientific community or scientific communities. And I'll spend a bit of time on this because I think it is of such central importance in the whole business of determining how we strengthen the scientific networks and the scientific enterprise as a whole. So, well, let me continue. So as a scholar, and I'll talk about scholars and scholarship generally rather than scientists only. So one is almost by definition a member of a community, and often multiple communities. A colleague writing about this and about academic life generally speaking referred to these communities as mutual aid societies of lifelong learners. So in a sense, we are lifelong learners as researchers, as academics. We are part of these societies or communities which are supportive and through which we share our work and our experiences. So, we can think of these as sets of constituencies, starting with the smallest, which might be your community of colleagues or the community of colleagues in your department or in your discipline. I might think of colleagues in my own department, in mathematics generally, and then perhaps nationally, across the country, and then of course internationally as well. And then we might make connections with other disciplines along the way. So, if my work intersects with engineering as much of it does, then I sort of regard myself as having a foot in that community as well. And in fact, it's these kinds of intersections that provide very fertile ground for multidisciplinary work. And that is something that I will come back to in just a moment. So you may then ask, well, all right, so I'm saying that you're a member of this or that community. What does this mean in practice? Well, in practice, it generally means participating in various joint activities at the departmental level, of course, but then via professional societies, whether it's Institute of Physics or the South African Mathematical Society, or whatever it might be, and other such activities at the regional level and also perhaps at an international level. Just to backtrack for a moment, colleagues, what I've set out here are the kinds of areas or topics that I want to touch on in my presentation. And I've already started talking about the scientific community, the top left corner. Some of what I will say there has to do with partnerships and collaborative work. And then I want to go on to the question, well, why would we want to collaborate? Then a key topic, what to work on, what should I be working on, with whom should I be working on that, and what exactly are my goals. And again, just bear in mind, you know, that all of these topics or items link to the title of this presentation, which is about strengthening the scientific enterprise. And this gives an indication of all the different facets that one has to think about in the context of that particular goal. I do want to spend just a bit of time on integrity and responsible conduct as a scientist, talk about the whole matter of inclusivity or lack of that, as the case may be. I'd like to say something about publishing, and the various implications of publishing and how we go about it. Managing your time, communication, those sorts of issues that impact in a very personal way a lot of the time with individual researchers. And then last but by no means least, I want to say a little bit about leadership and service. So Megan, fine, I think we could stop sharing, and possibly I'll come back to this later on, maybe not. So if you could just stop that sharing. And then I'll go back to what I was talking about, the scientific community. And so if I could carry on here and then ask the question, well, what does it mean to be a part of these various communities that I was talking about? So, well, we communicate with each other, we share knowledge, we share a passion for our work, we gossip, of course, about what's going on in our world, in the scientific world and otherwise. We attend conferences and colloquia. We also engage in scholarly citizenship, very, very important. For example, by serving on committees, reviewing manuscripts for journals, examining master's or PhD dissertations. And of course, we engage in formal collaboration. Also, you know, I refer to this as a kind of mutual aid society. We provide support, and we enjoy the company, the camaraderie, the intellectual friendship, and we also benefit from the criticism that comes from being a part of these communities. Okay, good. So, you know, with regard to the whole business of collaboration, there are some specializations and research problems that lend themselves to solitary pursuit. But there are really many, many cases to be made for engaging in research on a collaborative basis. Again, with an eye on how we strengthen the enterprise as a whole. So, in fact, collaboration is the lifeblood of intellectual progress. It's the means of interaction through which ideas, our hunches, take some sort of shape. They grow from their embryonic origins through the give and take of the creative process, and eventually they become worthy additions, shall we say, to the store of knowledge. So, you know, often when people discuss the research enterprise and strengthening it and so on, there is reference, quite rightly, I think, to the whole business of critical mass, having a critical mass of researchers. So adequate numbers of researchers in a discipline may, in fact, it is a necessary condition for the discipline to flourish, but it is not enough, it's not sufficient. And we would still, even if we had the numbers, we would still find progress difficult without the kind of cohesion that is really part and parcel of a well-integrated and a strong and enduring community of scholars. And so what I mean here by, and I actually looked, I reminded myself of the definition of social cohesion, which is really the presence of high levels of trust, a sense of belonging, a willingness to participate and to help others, and also policies and practices that ensure complete inclusion. And so that's the sort of thing that we should be aiming at, and aiming to continually to strengthen, to build on as we go along. So the vision then would be of well-connected groupings of researchers from academia, research institutions, the professions from industry, civil society, with complementary strengths in various areas. We can't all do everything, so this is another reason why these networks are important. So we work synergistically, and then we have layers of seniority. We have senior professors, we have intermediate and more junior academics, we have postgraduate students and so on. These layers are important because, amongst other things, they provide for succession and a refreshing as we go along. So if I could turn to the next topic, why would we, in fact, want to collaborate beyond what I've just been talking about? Well, the motivation for doing so may be multifaceted and would include factors such as a common interest in a research question, and also a recognition that a joint attack would be more effective, a joint attack on a problem, than separate parallel endeavors. You sitting in your office and me in my lab and whatever, working independently, but with no kind of cross-fertilization. So a communal approach, a collaborative approach, is also highly conducive to generating multiple ideas, testing these, using each other as sounding boards, and overall making for a much, much richer outcome. I also want to comment on its relevance to the reality that we are living and we are working here in South Africa. And, we may have email and Zoom and all these sorts of things, but nevertheless, the reality is that we are geographically isolated and we are academically isolated in relation to whatever our discipline is, in relation to where the real critical mass is and where the real momentum is being generated. And that would be largely in the developed world, although, China has developed really, really rapidly in the last 10, 15 years or so, India as well. But that is a reality that we must recognize. Generally, without a critical mass, not only of people, but also of resources to hand. And then perhaps our connections to the broader community internationally, that is not what it should be. It's tenuous. Coming back to the whole strengthening thing. So a collaborative approach would provide the opportunities for networking and for integration in the broader community, resulting in an environment of natural and easy flow of communication and of the cut and thrust debates that are vital to the creative process. And in this way, in fact, those kinds of connections will contribute directly to a strengthening of our capacity at the local level, provided that we are partners in the real sense. We must not be passengers. We must not simply be recipients, but we must become partners in the real sense. And particularly for young scholars, and I know you're all, you're not emerging scholars, you're mid-career, but nevertheless, you are much younger than me. And so as far as I'm concerned, you're young. These considerations are especially important because this kind of collaborative engagement provides opportunities to strengthen your own armory by being able to draw on intellectual and other resources of the broader community. And then as time goes by, perhaps this got going when you were an emerging researcher, just past your PhD, whatever. But as time goes by, you become a stronger researcher, you become very much embedded as a member of the community, and then you don't only receive, but you also give back. I want to say just a word about, also in the context of partnerships, about cross-disciplinary work. So, particularly if one looks at some of the major challenges, major global challenges that face us today, and these are, well, to a large extent, captured in the Sustainable Development Goals. There are many, many challenges. We could talk about climate, of course, we could talk about pandemics as well. The real effective research and the real productive work takes place at the intersection of a number of disciplines. You can take any one of the SDGs, and it's not really possible to make substantial progress unless one is in partnership with colleagues from a number of other disciplines across the natural sciences and also, in fact, the social sciences. So it requires a multidisciplinary approach. And of course, if it requires a multidisciplinary approach, then obviously collaboration will be essential. So, there are some challenges in getting the recipe right for successful cooperation among researchers who come from distinct disciplinary backgrounds and cultures. For example, defining the problem, determining what is important and interesting, that is the first step. And of course, if you engage in transdisciplinary work, that is where the partnerships involve individuals and groups from outside of the scientific community, for example, in civil society, all of whom are involved in co-design and co-execution. Then there are further challenges in pulling the group together, getting to communicate effectively, setting the agenda, promoting a harmonious and productive dynamic, and being clear about the work plan and the overall objectives. So, just by way of example, my area is applied mathematics. I do a lot of work also with engineers, but about, I think it's maybe 20 years ago, I started communicating with colleagues at our medical school here at UCT in cardiovascular surgery with a view to doing some work in biomechanics. I work in mechanics broadly, so biomechanics applications to cardiovascular, shall we say, problems. And it took really some time for us to understand each other, understand our languages, the cultures in which we work. And then, eventually it fell into place, and it led to a really, really productive relationship where it was clear to my medical colleagues about the kinds of insights that I was able to provide as somebody who's completely from outside the medical community. And likewise, from my point of view, the kinds of problems that they were having to contend with from a mathematical, mechanical, computational point of view were really, really challenging and complex problems. So just an example. Anyway, let me move on and talk a little bit about what to work on, with whom, what are your goals. Well, firstly, problems should be interesting and important. Interesting and important, right? That's really, really important to bear in mind. How do you, decide what to work on? How do you really, settle on a particular problem? Well, you engage with people in your area. You develop a good feel through the literature, attending conferences, informal discussions. Also take stock of, I would take stock of my own strengths. What turns me on? What kinds of work do I prefer doing? What resources are available? In my case, pencil and paper, a good library, computers, and computers are quite cheap, fortunately. Taking into account also one's isolated situation and how one is going to be communicating. But really, you want to do it because you love it, because you're passionate about it, or else it's not going to work. You will, of course, have various goals. And what would be the goals? Well, I'd like to publish in top journals. I'd like eventually to be considered or to receive invitations to deliver keynote talks. I would very much like to be promoted to associate professor, full professor, and of course, I'd like to secure a high NRF rating. One way or another, what these boil down to is the need to establish an international reputation. And the more people we have who have undoubtedly an international reputation, the stronger the scientific enterprise will be. So I should say, I want to say just a few words about sabbatical leave. Now, I hope that sabbatical leave is a privilege and a policy in all of your universities. It certainly is at UCT, where one's granted a year for study and research after laboring for 6 years. You labor for 6 years and you have a year off for study and research, or otherwise you could take 6 months after 3 years, which is the option that worked best for me. And in fact, I made very good use of such sabbatical periods. In fact, I only took 2 6-month periods and later on shorter periods. But what I typically did, and in the earlier part of my career, this was so important because I went to work with colleagues. I'll give you one example. I went to work with colleagues in Pavia in Italy who are absolutely world experts in this particular part of computational and applied mathematics. I knew very little about the area, but I wanted to know more about it. I wanted to do research in the area. And in fact, over a period of 6 months, I could get there to the extent that I was able, with my main host over there, to write a paper. So I was not simply going to go and sit there and work on whatever I was working on back home. I had a clear goal of what I wanted to get out of my time at this particular institute. But really, the important thing is to start, to grapple with something, get your hands dirty, write, draft, whatever, do some experiments, do some calculations, go beyond reading. There is a temptation, I think, in some cases, to read and read. Well, I need to know about this, more about this, and I need to read more. And then the next step is, well, actually, I need to read a little more, and then I'll be ready. And so it goes, and you never really get down to working on the topic. Don't wait until you think you know everything about it. That'll never happen anyway. Just make a start. And you'll have small successes, and they are really good for one's morale. Okay, so let me carry on. I just want to say a word also from the point of view of what to work on and meeting people and so on, about conferences, which are so important. They offer abundant opportunities to meet our fellow researchers, people working in our area. And what do? Well, you attend talks, you present a talk, and so on. But it's really, it's the coffee breaks and the lunch times and the evenings where you can seek out colleagues, get to chat completely informally, introduce yourself, find out a bit more about what they're doing, share something of what you're doing, and extend these linkages. And, perhaps, you come back, get back home and, drop the person an email just to, to say how much you appreciated chatting to them. And in some cases, not always, but in some cases, there are the seeds there for taking it a step further to talking about or discussing a particular project that you might want to be working on. So Again, I'd like to just reflect here briefly, not so much about conferences, but in this broad topic of how to get going, how to get started. I appreciate that you all have been, in your positions for a while, but nevertheless, let me just share my own experience. So I finished a PhD in the UK. I worked there as a postdoc for a year, and then I came back and I took up a position at UCT. So I was young. I was very, very much an emerging academic and emerging researcher. But I was very fortunate in that a senior colleague who happened to be the head of department, and we worked in pretty much the same area. He really took me under his wing. We started working on problems together, and it was a lot of fun. That's the first thing. It was a lot of fun. He allowed me free rein, and look at that and look at that, and then he was a very busy guy as a head of department, but always found time to say, let's just chat about this a bit more. Let's see how far we can get. And there were so many lessons I learned as I went along in that way. Another thing is that he got me started. He got me going very early on with postgraduate supervision. Now, I know, there are some heads of department who feel that, well, you've got to be around for I don't know how many years, so and then be a co-supervisor, etc., before you can supervise a master's or PhD thesis. Really, I think that the earlier one gets into it, the better. Maybe, if it's your first, second student, you would certainly want to have a senior colleague as a co-supervisor, formally or informally. But again, as part of the process of strengthening your profile, strengthening the enterprise, really important to get into that at a very early stage. So, I had my first master's student, I think I was in my second year as an academic, and then the following year, maybe 2 years later, he actually came on to do a PhD with me as well. So, and then a final word about this. So, whatever approach you're taking, there will be the usual frustration. So let's all, be aware of this, and I'm sure you've experienced it as well. There are dead ends, there are red herrings, there are delays in acquiring equipment if you work in a lab discipline. You battle with editors, and maybe the reviews are not so good of what you've submitted. You are spending so much time looking for a bug in your computer code. It's part and parcel. You just have to go for it, and you have to put a lot of time into it. So Thomas Edison said that success is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. And I do believe that's the case. So you need to be inspired, you need to be talented, but you need to be able to devote a lot of time to it. I want to make a few remarks about integrity, responsible conduct. Again, coming to the community, we are members of the scientific community. We have the networks. We have to pursue our work as scientists with integrity, and we have to ensure that we conduct ourselves responsibly, and we also teach our students to behave and to act and to work in a responsible manner. Now, what does all of this mean? First of all, there's the issue of trust. People have to trust you, you have to trust others. And by trust or trustworthiness, I mean, one has to be and be seen to be competent, reliable, and honest, right? So these are amongst core values of science. There are other core values, striving for excellence, admitting to error. We all make mistakes, be honest and open about the errors that we make, and we fix it and we carry on. Sharing our ideas, communicating our work broadly, and by this I mean beyond colleagues, fellow scientists through journals, conferences, etc. But think about what you should be doing to communicate your work to broader society, often with particular applications in mind. The obvious side of responsible conduct is research misconduct. And that is generally summarized as, particularly in the context of publication, fabrication, that is when people make up data in order to support a particular hypothesis, or falsification, taking data which is fine, which is good data, but manipulating it again so that it supports your hypothesis. Or plagiarism, and you all know what plagiarism is. There's much greater vigilance these days by editors and by others in relation to these forms of research misconduct, which I must say they've hurt the scientific community greatly. When broader society gets to know about these forms of misconduct, it tends to diminish their trust in scientists and what scientists have to do and say. And think about the COVID pandemic. Our scientists have done wonders. They've played a great role over there. And fortunately, here and there might have been some instances of misconduct, but very quickly and put to rest. We also have a duty to combat external threats such as pseudoscience, fake news, anti-vax views, climate skepticism, and the like. Take your point of departure as that of a scientist, where you have scientific consensus about a particular position and communicate that, particularly when communicating with the media or with broader society. Let me move on. Time is moving on. Right. So I want to talk about inclusivity. Now, this is just a very brief heading, but this is really what I want to talk about. There are often barriers to progress that have nothing to do with the technicalities of the project. And I'm talking here, for example, about discrimination, whether conscious or through implicit bias. Just to take a particular example, efforts to understand and combat gender bias have gained considerable momentum in recent years. And the data, and there's an enormous amount of data that is very clear on the difficulties experienced by women, who in many situations will constitute a small minority in research teams, and who may struggle to have their voices heard and their opinions respected. And in an article I read in Nature just a week or so ago, again, a very extensive research survey and project showed that women, and also PhD students, by the way, are more prone to bullying. There are similar considerations in relation to race, to socioeconomic status and background. Then there's the further challenge pertaining to partnerships between or involving researchers from the global south, the developing world, and the global north, or the developed world. So what's been referred to as helicopter research occurs when researchers from the developed world or from well-established science systems engage in research in less developed regions with partners from those regions, but with the former, that is, with the scientists from the developed world dictating the design, the conduct, the publication of the work, the agenda, everything. And going back to what I had to say about collaborations, this is not the kind of position that you would want to find yourself in. And I think it is really important for ourselves as researchers from the global south and for those from the global north to be particularly alert to and aware of the need to ensure that there is complete inclusivity. The agenda, the research agenda is planned in full collaboration. We are all real partners in the full sense of the word. And so here is a particular scientific responsibility. And you know, perhaps this is directed more to senior researchers and researchers from the global north, who have a duty as mentors to guide young researchers as they navigate these choppy waters. So senior researchers here, you know, so assisting our younger colleagues in overcoming ingrained biases that might jeopardize or really retard their research progress. Let me turn to the business of managing your time. So, well, you know, we all of us don't only do research. You're involved in teaching, administrative work. There are other research activities. We have our personal, our home lives. We have our families, and somehow or other, you have to manage all of this. And I have to say that it is definitely harder, much harder for the younger researcher than for people who are much more senior. When you are in the process of establishing yourself, looking to be promoted, going beyond your PhD, teaching, getting your teaching off the ground, trying to maintain a balance is extremely important. And it's so easy to let the research fall by the wayside because you know, the teaching is an obligation and you have family responsibilities and so on. There is no easy solution, but it is so important to take stock of all of this and to be realistic about the kind of time that you're able to spend on your research. Do you prefer to spend a whole day a week on research? Maybe you've got no teaching on that day or whatever, and from week to week you move along that way? Or are you happy and able to work with chunks of time in the course of the week through the term time? Or do you feel that you have to wait until the end of term, which is not something that I advocate. It's certainly not something I do, because I find that if you leave everything to when the teaching term is over, it's some time before you really recover your momentum, get going and so on. So try and keep the momentum going. With regard to communication, I just want to turn to communication. So we've learned a lot during COVID about virtual communication, and you know, by and large, it has worked really fantastically well. We've learned how to use Zoom, you know, in the way that we are, you know, communicating with each other right now. It's got drawbacks, but it certainly has massive benefits. You know, for example, I am on distribution lists for seminars that I held at universities around the world, and these institutions make provision for in-person and virtual attendance. So I can attend these talks, which I would simply, you know, not be able to sitting where I am. And so these hybrid approaches are also becoming very, very popular. But I'd just like to share something with you about the circumstances under which it really helps to have an in-person approach. And once again, it comes back to collaboration. So a key aspect of collaborative research is the process of what's called ideation performance. What that means is the whole business of generating ideas through interaction among team members. So this is important because the best routes to creative problem solving will depend in the first instance on there being a healthy number of ideas. So Linus Pauling, the Nobel laureate, famously said that the best way to have good ideas is firstly to have lots of ideas. So a recent, very, very detailed study has found that ideation performance benefits very, very strongly from in-person interactions, although the quality of the ideas selected is somewhat indifferent to the mode of communication. So the business of generating ideas will really benefit from in-person interaction. Turning to writing up and publication, you know, there's the business of where to publish, when. Well, go for appropriate journals of high quality. Coming back to the whole business of how do we strengthen the scientific enterprise? Appropriate journals, appropriate to the discipline, the particular topic, but journals of good quality, highly reputable journals. I agree, it's not always easy to get your work published in these, but do not take the easy road of publishing in a journal of poor quality. And let me tell you, if you want to get something published, you can publish it. It is possible to publish anything, right? There are so many journals out there, so many of dubious quality. So be careful about that. Also avoid what I call a disease of seeking to maximize the number of publications. Now, I know this is happening in many of our universities, particularly because the publication subsidy that universities receive from the Department of Higher Education and Training is calculated on the basis of the number of papers published. So people chop their work up into a number of publications, none of which will have the kind of impact that a good, decent quality, lengthier publication will have. It will do your career no good whatsoever to follow that approach. Go for high quality and, with quantity being very, very much a secondary consideration. The final topic that I want to talk about before we, have some discussion is the whole business of leadership and service. So I've talked mainly about research and collaboration and so on, but the strength of the scientific enterprise depends very much on the contributions that all of us make to ensuring that it works well. Okay, academic work, research in particular, is something that is regulated by ourselves. We don't have laws and contracts and so on, that tell us what we have to do. We have considerable freedom in deciding on the kind of research and the kinds of topics that we want to work on. All right, you have to go and look for funding and so on, but you have that freedom. But with that freedom come responsibilities as a scientist. So, be willing and keen even to review manuscripts for journals. And, perhaps if you're not being approached, ask a senior colleague to approach an editor or approach an editor yourself. Say, listen, I'd be very keen to review papers or manuscripts sent to your journal in these particular areas. And I'm telling you, editors will be very happy to receive such communications. Also serving on committees for conferences, for professional societies, promoting your discipline, and also academic leadership in the university. So in due course, think about becoming a head of department, a dean, maybe a deputy vice chancellor or a vice chancellor. It is very important that the individuals who occupy these positions, I'm not saying it's essential, but it is so desirable, I think, if they have backgrounds as strong scientists or scholars, generally speaking, strong academic backgrounds. Postgraduate supervision also, we generally speaking, you are not obliged to take on so many postgraduate students a year, whatever. It's a matter of choice for the academic. It certainly is at my university. But there again, it's, and I remarked on this earlier, it's important to get into this early and to ensure that at any given time, you've got master's, PhD students. The number may be quite low to start off with, and maybe you can increase that as time goes by. In any case, it will, by and large, connect very well with your overall research program. So very, very important to do that and to start as early as possible. So Andrew, I think, there are lots of other things I could say, but I've gone a bit over time, and I think I should stop there, and I'd be very happy to take any questions. I see lots of chats. I haven't had a chance to look at what is in the chat box yet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very delightful presentation, and and sharing your ideas with us. Before I ask one or two questions to start off, I see there was a question. I imagine it was just as you were talking about salami slicing of papers. In terms of that, Dr. Munir Abruf asks and says, does the length of the publication count? Does it matter? Especially that some journals anyway, have a limited number of word count for journals.
Yeah, well, I would say it's a good question. I would say generally not. The challenge is in a way the other way around, and it's what you described. Some journals have a page limit or a word count limit, and I should say generally it's not the case in the journals in which I publish, but from time to time, for example, in my work in biomechanics, I've encountered this constraint. And then often it's been working with students of mine, we've had to think about, right, so how do we communicate our work in such a way that we will conform to the 5,000 word count or whatever that might be. So, just as the number of papers in and of itself does not count, rather than the quality, in the same way, the length of a paper does not count. Of course, in cases where you don't have this limitation set by the journal, it may be that some of your papers are particularly long, and in those cases, sometimes editors will say, look, or a reviewer may say, look, this is really too long. These authors can say and present everything they want to in 20 rather than 30 pages, that sort of thing. Oh, you respond as best you can to that.
Thank you very much. One of the things I have been privileged to facilitate, these conversations in the past, and I enjoyed the point you're making about, collaboration, and of course the importance of networking. A couple of weeks ago, somebody asked a question or lamented the difficulty of, being, especially as we go, collaboration, and how you find people to collaborate with.
Yes.
So it was quite refreshing for you to touch base with, especially, conference attendance, and now you move beyond that. But I would like you to perhaps again talk a little bit about collaboration, because increasingly, as you said, more and more complex problems are bringing us all together. It's not just the natural scientists. You, for instance, as you were, looking after, and they've looked after all of us as scientists, whether we are from the social sciences, natural sciences, in the International Science Council. So how are you seeing people coming together to do those co-design, co-collaboration, the conversation you talked about to start the collaboration?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah. Look, I think that it's becoming a strategic priority at most, I would say, of our universities, certainly in South Africa. And the implication of that is that it's built into the strategic. And from that planning, there are efforts by university leadership to, shall we say, to create conditions that are conducive to collaborative work. For example, by focusing on a particular topic. So, for example, at UCT, we have a highly multidisciplinary program around water, something now called the Future Water Institute, and it's got people from engineering, from the sciences, the social sciences, the health sciences and so on. So that is one avenue through which these kinds of efforts get off the ground. I should say that I also note some difficulties in my university, and maybe others as well, in crossing disciplinary boundaries. It's amazing, we talk about the silos, and it's amazing what sorts of barriers they represent to effective collaboration across disciplines and faculties. So one has to be aware of that. And so, bearing all of that in mind, I think it's really important for us, not as deans or whatever, but as active researchers, to take the initiative. Let's suppose you work in an area in which something like climate. Let's say climate is relevant. Perhaps you are a geographer, an oceanographer. You may even be somebody who models climate, works in fluid dynamics or whatever. Ask the question, well, look around, first of all, in my own institution, can we get a few of us together to talk about how we might forge a collaborative project in this area? Let's talk about what it should look like and what strengths we have. I think it's really important to take the initiative, and you don't feel that you have to wait for the senior people to take that initiative. Do it yourself. Start talking to your colleagues, try and get a meeting going, and get some sort of cohesion, momentum, and then at that stage, perhaps go to leadership and try and get support for that. Yeah, but it's about taking that step, making the start.
Jaishika Siddharth asks and says, in her reading Jonathan Janssen's tweets and so on, he has the opinion that supervisors' names should not appear on student publications or working together with students. And she wants to know, what is your view? Given that sometimes students may need that kind of support as scaffolding, as it were, for the lack of a better word. And academics may not have the funding to not fund, whatever the case. But what is your view about preparation of a manuscript, and when do you think it's ideal or not ideal?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jashika. Excellent question. In fact, I had this topic jotted down and I didn't get around to it. Look, firstly, I think that the set of co-authors, authors of an article, should comprise only those who've made a non-trivial contribution to the original results in the paper. Okay, so I'm definitely not in favor of what people call courtesy authorships. This senior professor has been so kind, showed me the way to get onto this, whatever, maybe even helped me get some funding and so on. Let me make him or her a co-author. I'm not in favor of that at all. Should supervisors be co-authors? Well, I am often a co-author on articles based on the PhD work of my students. There are times when I'm not, and on those occasions, I really feel, gosh, you've just done all of this yourself. You've gone off in a different direction. That's great work you've done. You can perhaps just thank me in an acknowledgement or something like that. I don't have to be a co-author. But I do consider the question that you have asked. Is it appropriate for me to be a supervisor? Has my contribution been beyond simply pointing the student in this or that direction? And so in that sense, I wouldn't quite agree with Jonathan's, rather rigid, what sounds like quite a rigid view. By the way, Jonathan Jansen and Dani Visser from UCT are co-editing a work which will probably come out later this year, which will really be, it'll consist of about 15 chapters, I think, and aimed at early and mid-career scholars. And in fact, I've written a chapter on building research collaboration. So, yep.
Excellent, thank you. On that scope, perhaps let me put you on the spot, of course. Oh, I see Het van der Westhuizen has got a hand up. Het, you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Andrew. Professor Reddy, I really want to thank you for your inspiring and authoritative presentation. I'm Gert van der Westhuizen. I'm an academic advisor to the Future Professors Project, and I wanted to just share with you one reference to some of the challenges that we have in this program and ask your comment, please. The Future Professor Program, we have a cohort of candidates who are preparing for the professoriate, but they are also contributing towards changing the professoriate. So obviously we have a strong future orientation. And the question I want to ask is around community engagement. If you think about the future of community engagement and the need for professors to be intellectual leaders in communities and do research that will impact livelihoods across all disciplines, if that's the kind of future vision we have, please comment on, well, let's say the scope and possibilities, especially with the view how things should be changed for improving livelihoods in future.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Gert. Yeah, very important question. And in a way, it goes back to what I was saying about the responsibilities that we have as scientists. Well, I went only as far as referring to our responsibility to communicate, to make our results accessible to broader society. But really, your question is relevant to the following. What should I be doing by way of communication, possibly collaboration, possibly just having a very direct impact on that is addressing particular challenges in broader society, in which I can draw on and make use of the expertise that I have in my particular discipline. I think that it's extremely important. Look, different academics will pursue this to a different degree. It depends on the, shall we say, the strengths that the person has. It depends on the discipline as well. You know, just as, you know, not everybody, not all of us are have the same set of strengths, shall we say, in teaching. A good head of department will allow us to play to our strengths. In the same way, I think you'll find some variation here. But the first step, which possibly is the hardest, is identifying what those problems might be and where one might be able to make an impact, and engaging with, it may be civil society organizations, and in many cases it might be the various engineering industries as well, trying to get a conversation going. It may not lead to anything, you know, in the first instance, but you have to take that first step. So, you know, let's just organize, and obviously with the help of senior people, let's see if we can work with this or that NGO. Hear what they've got to say. Let's share where we are coming from, and let's see where there is some common ground and where we might be able to make an impact. So to summarize, really, I agree, and I've read the your document on the program, and I did take note of this, and I think it is so important to have this incorporated in the planning and the thinking and the ambitions of our researchers.
And
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Het, and can't agree more, Prof. Reddy, and especially to give, I mean, again, the challenge to the young professoriate and groups of persons to also put on the table the kinds of things that they would like us to, to consider as we go.
Yes.
We really appreciate your inputs. Let me just ask if there is any burning question that the colleagues have got for you.
I see Matabo has raised a hand.
Matabo, you want to go ahead?
Thank you very much, Prof. Kaniki and Professor Reddy. It is very interesting that you are saying you have written a chapter about collaboration in the forthcoming collection. My question to you is, in universities, the rewards are individualistic. It's every man for himself. The promotion, the rating, all those things focus on the individual, not necessarily the collaboration. So how do you bring those together in your writing, or how would you advise us to work towards a future where we still get promoted or rated, but we value the collaborative effort in making better societies?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
And perhaps, Daya, I think Matabo was reading my mind. I was going to put you on the spot.
Okay.
To say also, especially what she says, we always are now aware the heart again of being an NRF person. You chaired sessions of committees and executive committees, and particularly the issue we've been always, criticized on the fact that you focus and you are telling us about collaboration, but in terms of rating, how do you make sure that an individual is actually recognized for the work they do? So perhaps you can elaborate on how you did it. How did you look at individuals and acknowledge them in the group of collaborations?
Okay, no, thank you, Matabo and Andrew. Yeah, and my response would be quite similar, whether referring to an NRF rating or an application for promotion. So we are talking about research here. First of all, I think one has to recognize that by and large, engaging in work in a collaborative way will make you a stronger researcher. Not because you are, hanging on to somebody's coattails, but because you are partnering with somebody in a very creative way. So you don't have to do it like that, but there is a lot to be said for that. So in other words, collaboration is good for research. And that is something which I certainly hope that, deans and promotion committees and NRF assessment committees and so on will recognize. Now, the next thing is, well, okay, fine. You're applying for promotion and you're submitting your list of publications, and one reads through it and we find that you've got 2 co-authors here, 3 there, whatever. And maybe to some extent one can kind of figure out your contribution from where you are in the order of the authors' names, but often one can't really do that. It is absolutely vital to present information well. I think we've learned, and promotion committees and the NRF as well, everybody has learned that first of all, you can't just count the papers. Secondly, don't even look at the impact factors. You know, you need to know what has been the impact of this work, okay? And that's what the NRF asks reviewers. What has been the impact of this work? What has been this person's impact, okay? So the onus is on you, Atabo, as the person applying for promotion or for an NRF rating to say, well, you know, this is what I've achieved. So we did this work. I worked with so-and-so and so-and-so. This was my contribution. This was the impact of the work. You know, one very, very positive development amongst more and more journals, and particularly, you know, top rated journals, is that they ask authors, please indicate what have been the contributions of the different co-authors. And so you'll see at the end of the paper, acknowledgements, whatever, and then it will say, so-and-so conceptualized the work, or these two conceptualized the work. So-and-so carried out the experiments. We all were involved in interpreting the experiments, and so on and so forth, you know. And I think that that is such a good development. But we can't yet rely on that to be the case with all journals. So the onus is very, very much on you. And I certainly hope that the promotions procedures will ask authors not only for the list of papers, but also what they think the impact of the work has been, and what their contribution has been. The NRF does ask this anyway of its reviewers.
Thank you very much. And I think that's one of the lessons we've all learned. I agree with you, Prof. Reddy, and also something that this group must learn to understand, to narrate in terms of their contributions.
Yes.
And you will recall, you know, somebody who became very highly rated woman researcher at BITS, and who was working in a very critical group, and the other members of that particular group always were rated higher, and of course she was not. But eventually through the process, you know, we then found a way in terms of the description to find that in fact she made the major contributions in terms of conceptualizing to such an extent that we move on. So yeah. I really appreciate your input, and of course emphasize to the colleagues here that they must learn that particular attitude. Yes. I mentioned at some point that, for instance, if you also look, as you have indicated, Professor Reddy, about the policies in universities, even the decadal plan of the Department of Science and Innovation now has the emphasis on the fact that they're looking to be funding projects that are collaborative. Yes. And in doing so, then there must be a way of analyzing and, you know, putting together and say, this is my contribution, this is this one's contribution, in order for us to do a much better work. So I really appreciate that. Colleagues, we are coming towards the end, and perhaps let me just request you, you know, again, to make sure that you complete the review on the assessment of this particular presentation and conversation that we have had. They always help us, and of course help Megan and Kate in terms of how we are, you know, what difference these kinds of presentation are making. So Professor Reddy, thank you very much. Yeah, Professor Reddy, any last words from your side?
Well, you know, the last word perhaps is, it's supposed to be fun. Hey? Don't forget it. It's supposed to be fun. This is why we do this. So really, you need to enjoy yourself. And as I said, you know, small successes, you need those morale boosters, and go about it with a positive frame of mind. There are always setbacks along the way. It's really an occupational hazard, I would say. But proceed in a positive frame of mind, and have fun. You know, just have fun.
Thank you very much. And colleagues, thank you very much. And we adjourn this particular session.
Thank you very much, everybody, for listening. Thank you, and all the best. Thank you.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.